hundreds of years, Nice has been one of the places to visit if you're looking for the good life. Great food and drink, and of course, glorious weather. It's the perfect place to relax, a magnificent location on the French Riviera. But these days, it's also the home of something considerably less relaxing, the Nice Triathlon, which combines 3 disciplines, starting with a 4-kilometre swim across the Bay of Angels. That's followed by a 120-kilometre bike ride through spectacular but demanding countryside. And then, to top it all off, a 32-kilometre run along the Promenade des Anglais in the June sun. Total time? Well, for some, all day. But for this man, Mark Allen, holder of the course record, it can take a little under 6 hours, and this year he's back to defend his incredible record.
I've been here 6 times before, and I've won it 6 times, so I'd say I've had very, very good luck here. It's a great town, it's a great course. It's one of the more challenging courses, technically, that we have in triathlon, and that makes it more interesting for me to come back and try and defend.
Last year, he returned after a 2-year absence to gain that 6th title. It all seemed so easy, but can he make it 7 this year?
The race here in Nice is going to be much more difficult, though, than it was last year. It's not going to be an easy one.
Hi, everybody. Ross here, and this is episode 4 of the Streak podcast. That clip you just heard was from the 1990 Nice Triathlon. In 1989, they moved the race to June, so it didn't clash with Hawaii in October. Nice 1990 was also the second triathlon that I ever saw on TV, after the Heineken Southport Triathlon in 1989. There's a podcast about Southport coming soon. My mum had a friend who had the new cable TV installed. We'd give her a pack of VHS tapes and she'd fill them with rare triathlon, cycling or athletics coverage for me and my brother. Now, episode 2 of the Streak podcast was called The Speed and the Sweat. It was about my first triathlon and deciding at the end of the 1989 season that even though I was only 16 and doing my GCSEs, I wanted to become a professional triathlete. In 1989, there were no academies at universities, national team performance pathways, or World Cup circuit. So the only way to do it back then was as a privateer, living off prize money, savings, small sponsorships, and your parents. Hopefully wintering in San Diego and racing as often as possible. This might include occasionally hooking up with a French or German club. I read a lot of golf books and love the history of the game, especially the stories from the early days of the PGA Tour, when players were actually on tour, driving from event to event without going home. I actually imagined triathlon developing along the golf model, allowing the journeyman pro to make a respectable living. There would be multiple circuits, like the US, European and Asian tours in golf. Entry would be via a Q school, and athletes would have to race at all distances, while attempting to be on peak form for the majors. The golf thing obviously never happened. However, starting in 1985, the Grand Prix series provided regular national standard racing and some pocket money for UK-based pros. Names like Peter Moisey, Kathy Bowe, Mark Marabini, Sarah Springman, Bernie Shrewsbury, Sally Aikin, Tracy Harris, Vicky Lescombe, Richard Hobson, Doris Truman, Rick Kiddle, Pippa Cribb and Mike Harris. By 1986, the Grand Prix was sponsored by Coq Sportif. The French sports apparel brand had brought out a one-piece tri-suit and a range of triathlon separates. They were also sponsoring a triathlon team and the European Cup circuit. In 1987, the European Cup even included a race in Canterbury in the UK. In 1988, I started buying triathlon magazines to follow the Grand Prix series. There were 10 events that season, so basically one race a fortnight. The venues were Swindon, Barry Island, Otley, Ripon, Milton Keynes, Redbridge, Keswick, Wakefield, Leicester and Bedford. The Swindon race was organised by John Lilly and Trevor Gunning. Trevor was the owner of the specialist triathlon shop Total Fitness in Swindon, and John would start 220 magazine the following year. Together they would also launch the 220 race series in 1991. To get a final Grand Prix ranking, athletes had to complete at least 5 events, and overall series winners received £750. Highlights of the year included the overall high standard and close racing in both the women's and men's competitions, even though Britain's 2 reigning European champions, Glenn Cook and Sarah Coupe, focused their seasons around races out of the UK. Similarly, the use of a 4-lap circuit and an evening start in Otley that drew plenty of spectators and a brass band was also a high point. It was suggested that this format could possibly be used to attract TV coverage, much like the Kellogg's City Centre cycling. New levels were also set in terms of participation, as at least half of the events in the Grand Prix series had more than 350 competitors. The races at Ripon and Barry Island even had around 500. Low points of the 1988 season included misdirections of top competitors at a couple of events and several short swims. Although not part of the Grand Prix series, the Warburton's Big Bread Triathlon in Southport was probably the most high-profile event of the season. Triathlete magazine said that it put triathlon on a plane not previously attained in the UK. The Big Bread took place the day after the Otley Grand Prix, yet still attracted an international field and plenty of Grand Prix regulars. Sarah Springman and Robin Brew were the winners. For the 1989 season, the series was renamed the Carlsberg Grand Prix. Bernie Shrewsbury had a personal sponsorship with them and brokered the deal that saw the beer company sponsoring the whole series. There were 13 events that year in Swindon, Staffordshire Moorlands, Southampton, Blackpool, Ripon, Tallington Lakes, Dover, Wakefield, Milton Keynes, Rushden, Hunstanton and Emberton Park. I also had clubmates at Berkshire Tri Squad who were driving up and down the country to do as many Grand Prix races as possible, finding cheap B&Bs or camping at lake complexes and beach towns. They wore fluorescent clothing, rode Dave Russell bikes and had the new Scott DH aerodynamic handlebars. As far as I was concerned, they were living the late 80s triathlete lifestyle that I aspired to. The coordination of the series was taken on by prolific Bedfordshire race organiser Bill Steele, who even put on 6 of the 13 events himself. Most races had between 200 and 400 competitors. Again, only your best 5 results counted for the overall standings. Both Vicky Lescombe and Bernie Shrewsbury managed to win 5 races, and hence the overall Grand Prix and the £1,000 prize purse. Highlights of the season included the overall great weather, which was the driest summer since 1959, and the strong support from Carlsberg that included free beer at every race. Round 1 in Swindon saw the use of wave starts that reduced incidents of drafting. However, when the idea was used for round 2 at Staffordshire Moorlands, an elite wave was not included. This caused confusion for spectators and a mathematical kerfuffle for the organisers. The low point of the 1989 season was definitely the Hunstanton race, that was ruined by high seas and insufficient safety craft. Only 75 triathletes toeing the line for the final race in Emberton Park was also disappointing. Again, like in 1988, the most high-profile race was a non-Grand Prix one. And again it was the race in Southport, now sponsored by Heineken. It was on the same day as the Southampton Grand Prix. In the spring of 1990, I passed my driving test and bought my first car, a Skoda Estelle. The engine was at the back, which left a bike-shaped space under the bonnet. I was building my skills as a triathlete and was planning to do a mediocre job with my A-levels to take on the Grand Prix. The BTA announced a new series at their AGM that was planned to be just 5 events over 7 weeks in midsummer, with venues to be selected from Swindon, Staffordshire Moorlands, Alderney in the Channel Islands, Blackpool, Otley, Dover, Redbridge and Tor Bay. The dates chosen would avoid clashes with major championships, and the best athletes would have to consistently turn up, as the races would also be used for national team selection. Unfortunately, 1989 proved to be the last year of the Grand Prix, as the proposed 1990 series didn't actually go ahead. So instead of taking the Skoda on tour, I refocused on different goals. More about those in a future episode. The show notes for this episode are at thestreakpodcast.com/podcast/4, the number, not FOUR. As always, if you've got a question, a correction, some extra historical information, or just want to say hi, you can email me at thestreakpodcast@gmail.com. I'll leave you with another clip from the 9th edition of the Nice Triathlon that took place on the 17th of June 1990, and I'm planning a full episode about the history of the Nice race in the next few months.
One person who is going to be fighting Alan all the way is fellow American Mike Pigg. Only 26 years old and third last year. He's looking to improve. From Germany comes Wolfgang Dietrich, a noted swimmer who led after the first leg when last here in '86 before fading. He'll be hoping for something better this time. And then there's Rob Burrell from Holland, winner here in '88 when Alan was absent, and second to him last year. He'd love to beat him this time. And so with this man, American Dave Scott, 6-time winner of the Hawaii Ironman. Scott was dethroned by Alan last year. The man's back in Nice and looking for revenge. For the women, Paula Newby-Fraser from Zimbabwe is the clear favourite, an outstanding athlete. At 27, she's at the peak of her career. She won here last year and is looking forward eagerly to this year's race.
I'm really excited for the race. I think I'm a lot stronger. I think I'm faster this year, but you know, at the same time, everybody else is a little stronger and a little faster.
Two people hoping to be just that touch faster are the Puntas twins from Canada. Sylviane on the right was second and Patricia on the left third last year. But Newby-Fraser's biggest challenge this year could come from Kirsten Hansen. Her seemingly frail body generates enormous unsuspected power even on the toughest of bike climbs. And she knows the course well after being a winner here on her last appearance in '87.
I'd really wanted to come back and compete on this course. You know, I had a good race, but I had some problems when I did this before, and I've always wanted to come back to what I think is the most thrilling bike course I've ever ridden.
That sense of anticipation, mixed perhaps with just the faintest touch of trepidation, will be shared by many of her fellow competitors as they await the next day and the start of the race.